Hi, I'm Bill Crystal. Welcome back to Conversations. I'm very pleased to be joined today by A.B. Stoddard, reporter, once a reporter, now more of a columnist and an analyst, but an analyst whose analysis is informed by reporting, which is not the case with every analyst in Washington. So it's well-informed analysis. A.B.'s with Real Clear Politics, used to be with The Hill, ABC News, and a very valued contributor to The Bulwark as well. So, A.B., thanks for joining me.
Bill, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So we're going to discuss, just to locate people, this is the end of July 26, 2022, and we're going to discuss a couple of topics that AB has been one of the shrewdest commentators on. One, Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and the second, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, which is kind of most of American politics today, I suppose. But I was looking back at a piece you wrote in December 2020, so after the election, but pretty early December, I think December 7th, for the Bulwark, where you said, contrary to what the conventional wisdom at the time was, Mitch McConnell's wisdom, the Wall Street Journal editorial page's wisdom, the kind of, turns out, wishful thinking wisdom at the time, Donald Trump was going to remain central to the Republican Party and for the foreseeable future. And this was before January 6th and before all the evidence that accumulated that you were right. I mean, you were always a shrewd observer, it seems to me, of Trump. So talk a little bit about him personally as a phenomenon politically and then his relationship to the Republican Party.
Well, Bill, I mean, you and I both saw the same thing in 2015 and 2016. And we, of course, were given these bug eyes and, slack jaws when we went on Fox panels or elsewhere about how he would never, ever respect the Constitution or the courts or the Congress and that he would be dangerous. And so we saw all this. You don't have to wait till the January 6th House Select Committee hearings to discover that he's dangerous. We were never Trump because we knew that he would be a danger from day one, and he was. It was not as malignant as it was in his effect on the country in the coup, and leading up to January 6th and the day of January 6th, and now, of course, to this day. But he was still a threat to the country from day one because he lied more than 30,000 times in office, and his entire wiring is sort of anti-constitutional, and his sort of sociopathic psychological needs really make him anti-American because he can't be true to anything but his own grievances. And so what's so interesting to look back at that December 7th piece, because at the time we didn't use the word big lie yet. We were talking about sort of stop the steal. And it was like, wait, stop the count. Wait, we recount. Republicans were sort of all over the place and not really knowing how to handle it. And remember back to that time, it was just humor him. Just let him have a few weeks to just blow off some steam. Of course, we'd had 5 years at that point to let him blow off steam and, start his public platform as a would-be president, saying that Mexicans were bringing their rapists and stuff. I mean, this was always alarming, but somehow he loses a presidential election that for years we know he's going to defy and deny if he loses. And Republicans are, once again, head in the sand, hiding somewhere. And so at that time I wrote, he is actually going to try to destroy the Republican Party. That is the point here. You're going to be with him or against him. And now that he's lost an election, he's going to have to remain in battle and be the center of the spotlight. And that is true today. So this idea that Donald Trump was ever wedded to policy or Republican goals or the party is a farce. And we know that because in his time dealing with Congress as president, they only ever passed tax cuts. And they did that because Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell had to do that because the donors were going to flip out. And they had to do it by the midterm elections of 2018. By that point, it was so unpopular, they couldn't even run on it in the midterm elections. But at least they fulfilled a promise. Donald Trump never wanted to resolve legislative negotiations and come to a resolution. He wanted to fight. And Newt Gingrich said this to an effect in 2016. He says, Donald Trump wakes up every day looking for a way to stay on offense. So it's remain the center of attention and always be at battle. And so the idea of stop the steal would keep him or the big lie would keep him not only the center of attention and not a loser, but it would create a force within the party where it was, you're on his side or not. And that's remained the same from November 7th or November 3rd of 2020 until now. And that's not going to change as he positions himself for a third run for the presidency.
So so just coming up to the president, we don't need to dilate, I guess, a huge amount about the last 18 months. So you were very shrewd on his psychology and shrewd also on the Republican acquiescence to him and to his psychological needs and the endless rationalizations of why one could go along, even after he lost, and then which a lot of people thought was the okay, finally, 4 years of it going along, but now we can finally liberate ourselves. Then January 6th, okay, finally it's going to happen. I mean, have even you been surprised by the degree, not so much by his behavior, because I think what you're saying is that his behavior was fairly predictable and has been in character, really, but by the degree of continued acquiescence, or every time they seem to want to, for a minute go away, they just come back.
Well,
both with elected officials and voters, I guess. I mean, was he, of course, remains pretty popular.
I think Jonathan Last has been, one of the best observers of this, which is that the elected leaders and public officials who once were institutionalists or respected institutionalists and felt that would be, they should find, their better angels and be that person. They loved Bob Dole and they loved Ronald Reagan and they loved, some of them, most of them, John McCain. And they looked up to people who had been leaders and who treasured and protected the institution. But then they found once their voters were swooning for Donald Trump, didn't care how much he lied, how cruel he was, how much he politicized and undermined our military, our judiciary, our checks and balances. It didn't matter. They went home and they looked at this reaction and they thought, I want my job. I'm just going to do whatever these people tell me. At church, in my own family, my brother-in-law, the country store. Wow, I'm not gonna be run out of town being righteous. I'm just going to go along with this. And there was no greater example of that than Senator Lamar Alexander, who I, in every presentation for years, told audiences was my favorite senator, because Alexander left leadership so that he could work with Patty Murray and the Democrats across the aisle to actually accomplish things, to solve problems and to legislate. And so he had to get out of the fighting, the partisan back and forth in leadership so that he could step down and be a chairman of a committee and do good, solid things. And he did in the areas of education. He really, really made a difference for a number of years. Fast forward to his final year in office, he's retiring, and it's the Ukraine, the first impeachment, where everybody knows that Donald Trump extorted the Ukrainian president over congressionally authorized and appropriated funds and abused his power. And in so many words, and I have the quote in front of me, Lamar Alexander says about impeachment, well, you guys have proven your point. The Democrats made their case. They've proven their point, but I just think we should let the voters decide. There's an election this year, which in so many words said, I can't retire and go home and take any guff at the golf club. I can't handle this. He was a retiring senator, the exact moment when you should lay down the line and protect the institution and the service that you've given and say, this wasn't for naught. These are the things I believe in, and these are the principles I'm willing to I'll do anything to preserve. And he wouldn't, and he said it pretty much out loud. So this is where they are. They've always been led by the voters who swooned for Donald Trump.
And I do think also some of them, I think less with Alexander maybe, but his successor, Bill Haggerty, who actually knew a little bit when he was a Romney guy and an Alexander guy and a very established Republican, an ambassador to Japan under Trump then, where he still actually behaved pretty well, I think, and tried to keep the relationship on course despite Trump in some ways. He came back and ran as a pure Trumpy candidate in 2020 to win the primary in Tennessee, and Alexander had supported him. I think one rationale Alexander privately gave people was, well, I can't vote against impeachment because they'll use that against. I can't vote for impeachment to convict because they'll use that against Bill Haggerty. But getting Bill Haggerty elected is worth it because he'll be an establishment guy and he'll institutionalist and a sober force and a check on all the crazies. And he probably votes to overturn the election on January 6th, right? Or at least he planned to vote. Maybe he changed his mind at the end or something, but he signed that letter of 9 of them, I think, which caused so much trouble. People forget how important that was in the dynamics of that early January moment when the senators led by Hawley and Cruz, when it looked like it wasn't just crackpot House members, but the senators were going to actually object, so there would actually be votes, and so that's why you could go storm the Capitol. I mean, that was an important part of the whole dynamic that January, as I say, the first week of January. Anyway, so yeah, the whole thing is terrible.
How many of these people, Bill, in the executive branch and in the Congress have we heard tell us all these years that they had to do this or that because they had to make sure the right people were there, the right people would get elected. You know, they would preserve some kind of sanity and help place people of measure and competence so that it wouldn't be the lunatic asylum. That's often the excuse, and I understand the thinking, but again, that's the best example. It was really, really important for the Senate to hold when the House crazies wanted to decertify the election. And even members who ended up decertifying knew it was wrong and were saying so the week before. The House is a lost cause. It was really to spoil the Senate that way and to have the senators follow these presidential wannabes into that abyss was a huge mistake. And someone like Haggerty from a red state, he absolutely didn't have to do that.
Yeah. Though, I mean, one last point, looking backwards, and then let's go to the present and forward. I do think also the fact that the Republicans didn't do so badly in 2020. They picked up House seats. They almost held the Senate. They obviously lost those 2 Georgia seats on January 5th. But that was a large part of it. I think that it was both fear of the voters in the sense they might lose a primary, but also a sense that, Trump's onto something. If we want to govern the country, we can use Trump to do so. And that's their rationale, and not Trump using them. But and you see that to this day, right, where there's so much rallying behind even the worst candidates who've won these different primaries. They oppose some of these candidates in primaries, Mastriano in Pennsylvania. But now that he's the nominee, I just read this morning that, the Republican Governors Association's looking at the polls, and he's only a few points behind. So they're going to get behind him, as Pennsylvania is important. This is literally, kind of a Christian nationalist of some kind who believes it, I suppose, unlike Trump, but also explicitly devoted to overturning the election next time, basically. And Pennsylvania, you appoint the Secretary of State, so it's actually in a big swing state. It's kind of important. And no sense of drawing lines, that there are any limits to the degree to which they want the party to win.
It's terrifying because that, like you said, he's like looking for some holy war, but he also has been very, very blunt about his intentions to steal the election. And in a state like Pennsylvania, where you are not electing the Secretary of State and it's chosen by the governor, that makes it all the more dangerous. And it's really a profound statement that the establishment would get behind him. They could just sort of stay quiet and not make a big scene and not back the Attorney General, the Democratic opponent, but to back him and try to help him it just shows that they are at some level they're on board for the disruption of certification in swing states in 2024, which is that's the ultimate goal, and that's what the outcome is going to be. And you see that Brian Kemp in Georgia has not been a big stop the stealer, but he's backed these new election restrictions in the state wholeheartedly, and they have very much enabled a partisan state legislature to come in and cook the count, and that's what we're facing in 2 years.
Meanwhile, what's going to happen? So Trump. So it's late July. So what do you expect based on your close watching of him over the last 4 years? What does Trump do? Do you think now? Does he run? You think he runs in 2024? Well,
he has to. He's so much has said that he has to because of all the investigations and potential prosecutions and his legal exposure. So he's basically made the case that, they would never be coming after me if I wasn't, a candidate and a big political force. So he's going to announce, we've all read the reporting that his close advisors are trying to hold him back to keep him from doing this to stop him from doing it until after the November 8th midterms, but he wants to do it sooner, and it sounds like it'll be maybe in September. Who knows? It could be, August 20th. But he's going to do it, and he's going to do it for several reasons. He's going to run for president for the reasons I laid out, but also he just needs to be the center of attention. It'll be hard for him to do a couple things. There will be new fundraising restrictions, which don't, which don't help him because he's a grifter and he's basically been funding his life and his staff and his family, sucking up money from WinRed and really enjoying basically a real incredible boon since he started lying about the election. So even before January 6th, he's been raising so much money. That changes, and then the RNC, which he is basically controls. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we'll have to stop paying his legal fees. But he wants to do it because he needs to be the center of attention, and he wants to stop Merrick Garland from any kind of indictment, and he believes that he can just by declaring his candidacy. But also, there's so much focus now on Ron DeSantis as the next Republican nominee, the favorite, the man meeting the moment, and then just a lot of attention paid to Mike Pence. So while Mike Pence may not have a constituency, Mike Pence just makes news because he's so connected to the January 6th investigation, a potential DOJ, indictment of Trump. His aides are now cooperating with the grand jury, and all that drama. So Pence can make news any day, no matter what he says. And every day that Pence and DeSantis are making news is a problem for Trump. And so he wants to get out there and Bigfoot as soon as he can.
And I think it's rational from his point of view to go earlier, not later, because it does make it harder for people to announce they're running if they're running against him. It seems to me if Trump holds back, DeSantis, Pence, and others just say right after November 8th, well, I'm inclined to run. And then Trump gets in. And they say, well, okay, that's great. But, it's a little harder if Trump's 2 months earlier has announced he's running, then they're taking on Trump. I don't know that will deter them. I think it'll be a multi-candidate field. I'm curious what you think about that. And maybe a competitive race. But I think from Trump's own personal point of view, which, as you emphasized in that December piece a year and a half ago, is entirely what drives him, not the good of the party or, all these. And I don't you even think he's worried about running because if they don't do as well in 2022, he'll be blamed. I don't think he thinks that way. He correctly probably thinks that he'll say whatever he'll say they're doing much better because he announced them than if he hadn't, right? So like Mitch McConnell only won his race in Kentucky because I supported him. I mean, Trump could say, and he can rationalize it any which way. So I think he gets in. I agree with you, or before, like Labor Day-ish, or before the election in 2022. And Republicans could do pretty well. So then there's, probably will do pretty well. So he can take credit for whatever he wants to take credit for. And then what? So what happens? I mean, I guess, where do you think this goes over the next 2 years in terms of Trump, the Republican Party, the other candidates? Are you in the Trump is still dominant school, and the Trump is fading somewhat school, and the donors really want to move on, so the party's going to move on school? Give us your take.
Well, on that, it's both, and I'll get to that in a second. As for this fall and 2022, Donald Trump is very worried about the issue of abortion. And he knows it's bad for the party. And I think that any losses are of momentum, interruption of the red wave, instead of being, he won't take any blame for his nutball candidates. He'll say it was all because of Roe. And he'll say that's when I think he'll be pretty blunt about it. He'll find a way to sort of, fudge it, but it's a good way to take the heat off of him. And I think he'll use it. And he has been privately complaining that he knows that it's a bad issue for the party.
Even though his judicial appointments made it possible. I mean,
exactly. Well, he'll say, if pressed, and he won't be pressed because he'll only be in safe media spaces, he would say, well, I don't know, they said that they weren't going to do that, something like that. He's still mad at them for, 2020. So I think that it's going to be, so I think he definitely gets in before the midterms, and I think he is going to slow the red wave. I just wrote about that a couple of days ago. If you look at all his candidates, as we've been talking about, I mean, it's really a problem. It just is really a problem that J.D. Vance is struggling, that Herschel Walker is struggling, that Oz looks like he's going to flat out lose, that they're going to have nuts in Arizona. I mean, it's really a problem. And there's, all roads lead back to Trump for a lot of these picks, even if McConnell got behind Walker, et cetera. So that is going to be a factor. Do the people, I think you're completely right that it's harder for DeSantis and these other people to get in and then be instantly a candidacy opposing Trump, because if Trump is first in the ring, that is absolutely the case. I wonder what I think they will all get in because they're being encouraged to, because people are telling them, you got to be in there, man. He's going to keel over from too many French fries, or he's going to get indicted, and we've got to have a real race. We've got to turn to the future. We can't avoid him. He's like a bummer, and he sucks up all the oxygen, but we've got to have a real race. So I think you're going to see Rick Scott, Tim Scott, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Asa Hutchinson, and Mike Pence, of course. And then there's like that whole other column of never Trumpers. And I really don't know what percentage of the voting electorate on the Republican side in the primary coalition they can attract. But that's Larry Hogan and Liz Cheney, potentially Jeff Duncan, Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, who's stepping down, Chris Christie, Will Hurd, again, not a popular group in the Republican primary electorate, but I think we'll see some kind of try to fight for the old party or a new direction group. Those people, Tim Scott, maybe he's running for vice president. I mean, they all have to get in no matter what. So it's going to be a healthy bench of people. I just wonder what the issues will be. So is it safe to go after President Trump on hogging up all the money? Do you say he didn't really fight for Republicans? We didn't win as many seats because he could have campaigned more and he could have spent more money to fight Democrats, and he didn't. Is that a safe criticism that the base won't, blister you on? Do you just go there? Do you go into, he lost all these seats for us in 2018. He lost us the House and Senate and the presidency. It's time to move on. Do you go into January 6th? Do you go, do you accuse him of plotting a coup? I mean, if you're in the never Trump column, I just don't know. They're not going to fight him on immigration.
No. Will they even fight him directly on these things, though? I mean, Pence right now is saying we need to move on and we need to not listen so much to people who are dwelling on the past. That's like the furthest he'll go. God knows, God forbid he should actually mention Trump's name, let alone say that, the big lie is horrible and so forth. And Pence, of all of them, has the most, would think January 6th is a good distinction for him against Trump, but he doesn't, So I don't know. I mean, can they just run and sort of just treat Trump as highest regard for President
I don't think so.
Trump? I mean, he did a great job, but, I just think time for a change. You think, can they straddle that for a while? I don't know.
So you can do the turn the page next generation thing, sort of. Mike Pence is a total insider. He's been in government forever. What is his argument? Turn the page and let's like
DeSantis,
a federal ban on abortion.
I'm governor. Look what I've done here.
DeSantis is a little more of an outsider.
It's not about Donald Trump. It's about me.
Yeah.
It's about what I could have done as governor, I guess. I mean,
but I wonder. I really wonder how long you can stay on stage or in a campaign with Donald Trump and say, "Oh, I'm so pro-Trump. I actually hope he wins this nomination. I'm just here because we need some fresh energy." I mean, Donald Trump's going to attack everybody, or at least the ones who are threatening him. And let's go back, Bill. Donald Trump threatens the Republican Party in 2016 with an independent run. Reince Priebus, head of the RNC, runs over there to Trump Tower, begs him and pleads him to sign something. Fast forward to January 21, I think. It's his last morning as president. He gets on some airplane and starts telling Ronna McDaniel that he's going to leave the party. And she's begging him, you can't do this. You can't leave the party. So the RNC has, ever since that day, raised most of their money with the name or likeness or image of Donald Trump. They, promote his social media platform. They pay his legal bills. They're completely compromised, even though they say they're neutral. The threat is that he runs as an independent in the middle of the primary campaign. He sees Ron DeSantis getting too much attention and he flips out. This is all possible, and actually it's likely that he doesn't want to. Last time he eked out a plurality, but he was always sort of the dominant person, even though he wasn't dominating the vote share. He was the dominant person in the 2016 primaries. He wants to dominate. The idea that Ron DeSantis is going to be the boy wonder, Fox News has already chosen DeSantis. Where's Trump going to only go on OAN and Newsmax? Is he going to try to get back on Fox and make them give him just as much airtime as DeSantis? These are things that people are not really comprehending yet. Maybe Ron DeSantis is thinking about this somewhere, but he must dominate. And that will be the news coverage, the conversation, not only the polling, the debate stages. So it's going to be, it's not going to last very long. This, like, I just think we need some fresh energy. So I'm on the stage with Grandpa, but of course we all revere him, and he's still our fearless leader. I mean, that'll last about a week, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
Because he won't let it. He wants conflict.
Yeah, great. He'll be get off my lawn and in a pretty vigorous, to use your grandpa analogy, in a pretty vigorous way, right? I mean, I think that's a very good insight, though, that people are not thinking through what they kind of still, we all do. Okay, well, we're going to have a competitive race, so we know what those look like. We've had them in both parties for the last 50 years, and it's going to be primaries, it's going to be debates, it's going to be this. There'll be some difference on some issues. There'll be some nastiness. There was in the Democratic primary in 2019. Harris went after Biden, ironically, and so forth. But, I mean, it'll be limited in a certain way, jabbing, I mean, I totally agree. You can't assume all that about Trump. That's a very, but of course, it's hard to internalize that and to really think through what will it be like with Trump threatening to leave the primary. I assume refusing to debate on some stage with 12 of them, unless he thinks it's in his interest, which is a little bit. God knows what the RNC will do. Will all the primaries have actual primary electorates as opposed to conventions or other ways of choosing delegates? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right to sort of think that it's a mistake to assume Trump just dutifully takes the rules the way everyone else did in 2015. And even he had to some degree, because he wasn't yet, obviously former president or anything, and sort of say, okay, if these are the rules, if this is the schedule, I guess I just have to show up at this debate here. I mean, he missed one debate and then got a little pushback and showed up at the others. But yeah, it won't be like that in 2024, right?
He makes the rules. He makes the rules. He breaks the rules. You're right. He had to go long in 2016 because he was a neophyte. Now he thinks he's still president, like going to be reinstated any day now. I mean, this is a different game, and they have to anticipate that. I think Mike Pence, again, I think Mike Pence annoys him, but he's not a threat.
Right.
I think Mike Pence is probably the safest. Oh, we're just going to turn the page. I'm just going to keep talking, and I'm just going to use these platitudes and pablum and just stay on message and be the robot that I always have been. But Ron DeSantis is going to get pushed into a corner where he has to actually compete against Trump. So that'll be interesting.
And he has surrogates, as it were, the Elise Stefanik's and Jim Jordans of the world, who will be attacking the other candidates.
Yes.
That's another thing. The rules have all changed. So the politeness to all the candidates that you show if you're a lesser Republican office holder, that's not going to hold, is it? I mean,
you are right. I mean, for so many of these people, that Trump is still, whether they like him or not, and they're waiting and hoping for an indictment or a health event. That's where their bread is buttered, and they cannot. That's why I asked, what is the critique you can use against Trump that's safe with the base?
Yeah, no, that's good.
That's really hard to tell. I know the base, in Sarah Longwell's focus groups, we see this separation, right? But it's not because they don't love Trump. It's like, I think he's damaged now by this January 6th stuff. So, I think we need to find a new, fresh face. It's not that they'll never say anything bad against Trump. And so, what if you can you poke the base? I don't know that we know that yet.
Yeah. And I think the psychology of a lot of the voters, I mean, he's drifted down from, let's say, 65% support to 50% support. He's not like he's at 20, right? I mean, it's not an even race right now. It's sort of Trump at 45 or 50 and everyone else at DeSantis at 20 or 25 and everyone else in single digits. So now maybe that'll continue to erode. Maybe the January 6th committee, we should talk about that for a second. We'll do some damage. Maybe other things will. But he gets to do a lot of, and he gets to vote too. People do talk about it as if, okay, we know Trump. We know what he's going to do. He's just going to have boring rallies for the next year, and people are going to get increasingly a little bit tired of him. But I mean, I think you've thought a lot about. We talked about this before the show in 2023. It's not like Trump can't play a lot of cards as we go forward, right? Biden needs to be impeached next week. I've called Kevin McCarthy. The rhinos, DeSantis, are you willing to speak up for Biden being impeached, or are you just going along because you're, some wimpy governor who wants to have good relations with this Democrat who's in the White House? I mean, right? I mean, he could do a lot of things that will sort of keep turmoil and loyalty tests, really, that presumably, well, I don't know. I mean, does that command the support of 50% of the base? Does some of the base think, well, this is a little crazy, you have to let Kevin McCarthy be speaker? I don't know. What do you think? How much?
So that's what's going to be so interesting is that Trump has dumped on Kevin McCarthy, but he's not running against him right now. He's actively campaigning against Mitch McConnell. So the Senate Republicans have separated from Trump in terms of the leadership. And then they're just like, you go Ron DeSantis and Mike Lee and all the people who still, and John Kennedy, you go worship him. But we can't, we gotta keep our distance from the stink and the stain of him. Then the House leadership completely embraces Trump. There's all this flirtation with the idea that Elise Stefanik can be his vice presidential contender. What if, again, there's by no means a guarantee that McCarthy has a path to the speakership, even though he's positioned for it right now. He's raised a ton of money. He's kept a long leash with the rabid guys, but he's also been quietly protecting Jamie Herrera Butler and people who voted for impeachment to try to get them to come back. So you can argue he's done a lot right. That's what he tells himself. But Trump will dump him on a dime if he feels like it and say, not Jim Jordan doesn't really want to be speaker, but it would be like you go to the Freedom Caucus, you go to Jordan, and then you say who. And Jordan helped engineer the Elise Stefanik taking over for Cheney move. And so it could be Elise Stefanik for speaker tomorrow. And faster than Kevin McCarthy can imagine it. So Trump will make an effort to dominate the House because the House really that's his base, and it is a power perch for him.
Well, and also if they win the House, if Republicans win the House, which you've got to say the odds remain decent that they will, maybe not the Senate, then the House is the center of Republican action in D.C. as opposed to out in the country.
Yes.
And Trump says we need to do this. You need to pass legislation. I'm making all this, authorizing $20 zillion for a border wall, or impeaching Biden, or impeaching the Secretary of DHS, or having a hearing on a set of hearings on Hunter Biden, and they're all. I assume they'll go along, and that therefore Trump kind of. I think you made this point to me, and you should elaborate on it. Therefore, not me, but how much does Trump drive the Republican agenda in the House, and therefore sort of in politics in 2023, apart from, everyone kind of expects him just to be a polite candidate who is, flies to North Carolina to have a rally once a week. But it's not going to look like that, I think, right? He's going to be in the middle of it on the phone to McCarthy or whoever replaces McCarthy.
Right. And so the House will be an instrument for him, and it will be also even without him goading them, they already have plans there's going to be Hunter Biden investigations in multiple committees that will go on for the whole 2 years. They will impeach Joe Biden, and they're going to impeach, they're going to hold hearings on Dr. Fauci, and then they're going to impeach, Mayorkas, DHS secretary. It's going to go on and on.
Do you think, incidentally, just on this, do you think they will, will 218 of them vote to do this, or will 150 of them want to do it, and 50 or 60 will say, wait, this is too crazy. We can't literally impeach Joe Biden.
I'm not saying that they can get everything across the floor, but that they're planning for this. There will be pressure from outside, from the activists, and they want scalps from the Biden administration, and they will not be able to pass anything from Biden's desk, so they can have, performative show votes on border wall funding, but the base will want some scalps because Trump was impeached twice. So they want an impeachment of Biden. So if you're Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania won, and you're one of the only remaining moderates, and I mean the only, they're almost all gone. That's going to be a tough vote, but depending on their margin, how many, can they lose? They can probably lose enough, and it'll be a very radical conference, I think, Bill.
And they may not care that they lose, right? They get 200 and they get 190 votes, and then they just attacked the 30 Republicans who deserted them. And they still
That's
have done.
exactly.
And from Trump's point of view, that's fine. He's happy. He likes running against, as you pointed out in December of 2020. He likes running against Republicans, and that's always been key to his success. And to be fair, it was key to his success. It wasn't. That was not a bug. That was a feature. I'm anti-Bush. I'm anti-McCain. I'm against the war. I hate the Republican establishment as much as the Democratic establishment. That's key to his message, really, and he'll presumably keep that up. Again, he's not going to. In a funny way, he's been less vocal on that in the last year, just because there's been no occasion to really do it, and the party's gone along with him. So he sort of kept their support amazingly after January 6th. But I kind of think, after November 8th, the degree to which he turns on them again, as he did in 2015-16, and that sort of doesn't that force then the voters to sort of choose a side, and
right,
and then. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic that people haven't really thought through, I think.
I think that these 2 years was recovering from January 6th, rebuilding his strength in the party, which he has succeeded in doing. His numbers went back up. He's whitewashed January 6th effectively. He's had help from, Fox and everything else. And so it's sort of rebuilding his base of support, and now it's like he's got to stop Ron DeSantis' momentum in its tracks. So after November 8th, we're in a presidential cycle, and it's a different. I think he's on full offense again. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have Twitter. I mean, he's still been using his fax machine to blast Mitch McConnell occasionally. And he is, he did let it be known he was mad at McCarthy for screwing up the January 6th committee assignments, which McCarthy did. So I think it's just, this might be a time that we look back on when he was sort of staying calm. But he has to go into full gladiator mode again after this election, because it's in cycle. He's got to stop his opponents, and he's got to dominate again.
Yeah, interesting. I want to get to the Democrats in a second, but next week we're talking Tuesday, July 26th. In a week we have the primaries. There'll be a lot of attention on some of the Senate primaries, where the most radical candidates might lose, Greitens in Missouri, for example. On the other hand, we have 3 impeachers, I think. The few Republicans left in the House who voted to impeach, several of them retired, but two in Washington, Newhouse and Herrera Butler, are on the ballot this August 2nd, and then Cheney on August 16th. Is there one more I'm missing, or is that? And they could all lose. It'll be interesting to see if they lose or not. And if they lose, I think Trump really takes a victory lap there. And especially with Cheney, it's such a high-profile primary, and I don't quite know how that affects things. I don't know. It wouldn't be crazy if Cheney loses by 15, 20 points, which is possible. I don't know, to take huge credit for it and then announce his candidacy. Maybe you picked August 20th out of the hat, or maybe you were thinking of that. But I don't know. He's he's unpredictable, but he's not stupid in that way, right? He sort of sees the moment, right? And then it's sort of like him or Cheney. He makes it that, and then what does DeSantis say? So.
That's interesting. And about the timing, I didn't connect August 20th to Liz Cheney, but I was thinking that in the news desert of August, he thinks I can get all the attention before the January 6th committee hearings start in September. I can announce in August and just be like a Trump marathon. And so it's just sort of TV land and Twitter land. That might be, I think, a calculation, but that would be very interesting, actually, to just sort of jump from the Cheney defeat, sort of off of that, and say, see, it's a new party and it's still my party, or whatever the hell. But I think that, again, the way his advisors describe it is like he's been planning this since last August, which, I'm sorry, it makes me laugh, but he's literally been waiting a year to announce another run. So it could happen this afternoon. And
he's probably, that'd be good. He's probably impatient to do so. So are the Democrats ready for a Trumpy, let's assume, who knows what will happen this November, but let's assume it's kind of the average scenario right now, where Republicans do well, but not quite as well as people thought 2 or 3 months ago. They're hurt by some of their extreme candidates. There's less of a wave than people thought. I think you and I have both been slightly of the view that there is less of a wave right now, it seems, than people thought. But they do well enough. It's not and where are the Democrats? Joe Biden's, approval rating is poor. but Democrats slightly outperform the approval rating, you might say, in some of these races. Maybe they hold the Senate, they win some of the key governorships, maybe Michigan, Pennsylvania, let's say. Where are the Democrats? What happens to the Democrats over the next 2 years?
So 2023 is going to be a very tough year because after the midterms, the party has to have a conversation about what the midterms meant, and they're going to have to discern what their weaknesses are and what where the power of the anger against the elimination of Roe v. Wade mitigated their losses. And by how much energy did that bring to their side, and where their weaknesses remain that cost them 13 House seats in 2020, in a year they were supposed to just blow out. That weakness, as you and I have discussed, many times, comes from the fact that their cultural radicalism is unpopular with swing voters, and that working class, non-college, Black and Hispanic voters want more police in their neighborhood, and were really freaked out by the summer of 2020. While they backed the protests, this idea that you would have autonomous, lawless zones and businesses looted without consequence is really, really boomeranged on the Democrats. And I don't think they really had I think that the president has had a sober realization about this, which is why he forced himself to say fund the police 3 times in his State of the Union address, but the party hasn't publicly grappled with this. Swing voters frontline swing district Democrats in the House right now are begging the leadership, begging the Speaker Pelosi to try to put a police funding bill on the floor before, as part of the year-end spending before the midterm election, so that they can tell the voters that they've bolstered funding for police. So this is where the weakness comes from, and it's really if you layer on COVID lockdowns and loss of economic opportunity and inflation, they're really going to have a tough time with people who used to be part of their coalition. Like I said, that voter still turns out. Then the Roe voter who might not have voted in this midterm at all and is also mad about inflation, but is suddenly politically activated, I think, they will come out in full force and they will mitigate the Democrats' losses. So they have to have this family conversation. And then when they do in November and December, it's going to be this very raw time, because most of us anticipate that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will have just won her last reelection, but will not be running again and will not be standing for leadership and will not be the speaker in the next cycle. This is a massive,
leader if they're in the minority,
or the minority leader. I'm sorry, not lead them. This is a massive, massive turning point for the Democrats. She might be old, but she is a real powerhouse and is responsible for much of their success and their what she's really good at is avoiding, sort of fending off liabilities, mitigating problems. And if she steps down, you have a progressive moderate fight for the new leadership positions, all 3 of them. At one point, there was talk about maybe Jim Clyburn being an interim minority leader for 2 years with Hoyer, and then let's say Hakeem Jeffries as number 3 to sort of be a bridge to the next generation. Do the younger Democrats tolerate that? So that progressive moderate fight is really blistering. And then you get into, that's November, December, then you get into January, and then probably February and March is when you see the impeachment of Joe Biden.
Well, I would just think, and this family conversation sounds somewhat polite, and even Pelosi's a big deal, but the biggest deal surely is Joe Biden the net Democratic nominee? I mean, that's going to be don't you think that issue jumps right to the front of the line on November 9th? I
don't think that happens around Christmas. I think I think people start talking, may start saying, I'm going to run, but I don't think the full on who's our next minority leader and who's our next president doesn't happen at the same time. I anticipate that conversation starts after the new year. And, do you wait? Does he wait till after he's impeached? to make an announcement. So this is all obviously happening behind the scenes, but the progressives and who are fighting the moderates for the leadership position don't want to talk at that point about 2024, right? They'll say, we have to take care of this first. So we don't know what's going on at the Senate at that point. That's another scenario. So the House is this cauldron. Then we get into his impeachment, and then we get into when does Joe Biden tell the nation he's not running again.
But do you think the impeachment happens that early? Really? That seems a little unlikely to me. I don't know. Don't they have to lay the groundwork for the impeachment a little bit? Maybe not. I don't know. But I guess I slightly differ only in the sense that I think the Biden thing, I just think, this is where you've covered the Hill and I'm more of an executive branch person. I just think the Biden thing swamps everything very quickly. At the end of the day, fine, Hakeem Jeffries is the next leader. They have some fight for the number 2 position. Most of the country doesn't care, especially if it's the minority, honestly. Whereas the incumbent president of the United States may not run for re-election. That's rare. And a lot of people think he shouldn't privately. Some might start saying it publicly. I mean, how does that end up, though, do you think? I mean, what will he run? What's the timetable? You've thought a lot about this. You've talked to a lot of Democrats about this off the record, mostly, I think, at this point.
Bill, as you know, I think he cannot run. But before we get to that, it will be a big deal. The changing of the guard in the House will be a huge deal. And Biden will likely hold off on anything while that is happening.
No, he will
be
hold
very
off,
turbulent. And he will hold off. So
People
while
like
that conversation
people like
continues,
me are going to talk about it, though. Whatever. Yeah.
Right. We already started. We're talking about it now in July
Right.
Of 2022. So that's boiling up to the midterms, past the midterms. And it's sort of, when can Joe Biden admit that he can't run for a second term? And my thesis of this is that he has this problem with his vice president, that he doesn't believe that she can beat Donald Trump if he runs. And who in the party, how does he abandon her by not backing her and stay neutral in an open primary? And that's the big problem, I think, confronting Joe Biden.
You don't think there's a prior problem that he just would still kind of like to have a second term and thinks he's a healthy guy for his age and so forth?
I think Joe Biden knew when he ran the first time and almost offered a one-term pledge that you can't run for president at 82. No one has, and nobody in this country wants it. And I think he knows that very well. And I think that his fear is Trump running and the threat that Trump remains to the country, because everyone thought after January 6th we were done with Trump. But now Biden sees how much Trump has a hold on the country. All these millions of people believe the election was stolen and they want to steal the next one. And so he sees the threat and he thinks, and he's sort of paralyzed, right? Kamala Harris is not fit to step in. And so it's going to be a process for him, but the guy is tired. And he also, if he doesn't know that he can't run, Bill, because of his son, he's going to know that by next summer. And it's going to be very, very brutal. The probes into Hunter Biden and his very ugly life are going to be very painful. And it's going to be a huge anchor, and he can't run for a bunch of reasons, but Hunter is one of them. His age, the polls, a recession, but Hunter Biden is another powerful reason. So he has to come to that decision, and then the party has to be ready when he does to have a field ready. And they will have just gotten off of a progressive moderate fight over the changing of the guard of the leadership. And then where does that bring us in terms of a primary contest and that fight continuing? Oh, they want to sit around and blame Joe Manchin, and they're still calling for revolutionary change. And they think that, the old people in the party have let them down on guns and climate and abortion. And so, you're going to have this debate in the party where the moderates, maybe Gretchen Whitmer, who's just won re-election in Michigan, and she's a contender, saying, we have to win the middle of the country again. I hope she would say that, right? We hope there's going to be a moderate bench of people saying the party went too far left. We can't have a winning coalition given our liabilities in the Senate and the Electoral College unless we win back more of the coalition and working class America that we once represented. And that conversation has to be, I hope it will be very loud, and I hope it will be productive, but the progressives are going to push back.
But it's
and then
be
the
chaotic.
Senate's a whole other basket. Yeah, it's going to be chaotic.
I mean, the idea that people, leave aside progressives, moderates in a sense, and there'll be all kinds of gradations on that spectrum. I think that's a good way of characterizing, I think, the party. Well, that'll be characterize it. But there'll be just a ton of candidates, is that, don't you think?
Yes.
I mean, I just say, once it's clear that Biden's not going to run, certainly once he announces it, but there might be an interim where it's sort of clear, but he doesn't announce yet, and some people will be bolder and announce, and other people will be semi-bold and tease it, and other people will be very polite and dutiful and won't say a word until he... But I mean, I don't know. I just, in my head, have looked at the governors, the people who ran last time, one or two senators, maybe a few House members, a few outside types. It's pretty easy to get to a field of a dozen or so quickly. We could have really a situation that we haven't had in a long time, which is many candidates in both parties. I mean, 2016 was an open race in both parties, but Democrats quickly became Hillary Clinton versus Sanders.
Right.
It's almost more like an incumbent against a challenger, I'd say.
Yeah.
And so it's been a long time, 2008, I guess, but also there, the Obama-Clinton thing narrowed quickly. Whereas I feel like on the Democrat, ironically, the incumbent party could have the more wide open race, right? Because the Republican race will have sort of a feature of Trump versus the field, I think. Whereas the Democratic race, I mean, is there even a leading candidate? I mean, I think, we would, if we got 20 people who know a lot, all of our friends who are Democratic political consultants in the room, I suspect there'd be 12 different names that would emerge as, here's my pick to possibly win in 2024, the nomination, that is. Don't you think? There's no obvious. I mean, Harris would be the VP, but I think everyone thinks she's fairly weak. She'll run, and she might do pretty well. But anyway, I feel people are underestimating the chaos on the Democratic side in the next year. And then you add in the stuff that you mentioned about Congress and fights there and fighting back to defend the Biden administration against impeachment. I mean, it's going to be I don't know, have we ever seen anything quite like this in both parties? I mean.
Yeah, both parties are going to be so volatile. It's going to be, I think, quite destabilizing period, and pray for this nation. I do think I think you're right, Bill, that there's no obvious contender on the Democratic side, and I think there will be a lot of. I think Gavin Newsom is up in a Fox poll. It's one thing for Democratic primary voters to say that Gavin Newsom is like their favorite du jour because he's a fighter. It doesn't mean he's a good general election nominee. So, these are all going to be, this is going to be interesting. The best thing for the Democratic Party, there's no question, is for the contest to start in 23 a little bit early. If Joe Biden can step aside in terms of saying he's not running for reelection, I think it's just the best thing. Many things happen in a primary contest. There are surprises and upheavals in the thinking of the mainstream of the party. On the Republican side, I just see it as kind of frightening, just the idea of a really long primary that starts this August, with Trump doing what he can to throw as many chairs off the rooftop, and it's sort of bizarre. Very interesting to contemplate if Trump was off the scene, if something terrible, if Trump was suddenly gone. Very interesting to see, what is a Glenn Youngkin compared to a Tom Cotton compared to a Ron DeSantis. I mean, that's actually really interesting to think about, right? People will be very Trumpy, very focused on culture wars. But then would you have more cerebral types, really more focused on policy? That would be an interesting race, minus Trump. But it's going to be Trump, and it's going to be dominated by him, and loyalty to him, and fear of him, and all that. On the Democratic side, the best thing that Biden can do, and I wrote about this, is just make it clear soon, and then be supportive, remain neutral in the primary, say he will back the nominee with everything he has, but to encourage the country to move on from Biden and Trump, to have a conversation about the most important things, our system, the courage of Liz Cheney, the importance of our guardrails and our checks and balances, not policy, not just get off of Build Back Better and just start really talking like a statesman about the big picture, the system he's worked within for 40 years, and how the country needs to move on from him and Trump. And I think that would be so helpful.
Though I think, don't you, that, Liz Warren probably runs, and AOC or someone like that runs. And then, of course, a bunch of governors who might be more inclined to echo Biden on that as sort of, I'm a governor, I'm competent, we need to do, Polis, Pritzker, Newsom would kind of go in that direction. But I've got to think Klobuchar, Buttigieg, you will have a lot of fighting about these issues and fake issues and attitudes, you might almost say, about the cops or whatever. Some of it is not really issues exactly, but, identity politics. And Yeah, I mean, and can Biden really shape the discourse as a lame duck? I mean, it would be an interesting moment. I mean, maybe his being impeached helps him in a sense, or people won't turn against him while he's being impeached, right? I mean, they sort of have to defend him, which slows down the race. I don't know. Part of me thinks that 5 people by Christmas will have basically indicated they're running on the Democratic side, and part of me thinks
before he says anything. Yeah.
No, that's too. They don't want to look ungrateful to Biden, and they'll give him a few months here, and it won't be till the spring. But I don't know. There'll be some advantage to some of them. Will think of going first. I don't know. I think it's a very unpredictable. We haven't really had this kind of situation in an awful long time, really, with a one-term, an incumbent president who could run for a second term, but probably won't, but isn't going to say he won't, and has a vice president, as you say, who probably will run, and to whom there'll be some sense of, you can't just dismiss her, of course, and then governors and people who ran in 2020 and former cabinet members like Pete Buttigieg figuring out, how do I leave the cabinet politely, express my incredible gratitude to Joe Biden for what he's done for the country, and then probably turn around and run 2 or 3 months from now. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be pretty
I
crazy.
think to announce before he's going to leave is really audacious, because Tevye Troy just had his presidential story, and he just had a piece about how the that Biden should make it clear to the Democratic Party that he should not be challenged, because if he intends to run, and Tevye posits that he will and he should, which I disagree with completely, that all challenged incumbents end up losing, and it weakens the party, and that he should send that message out now. So it is actually it's probably a mistake to overtly announce that you're running. You could do the hinting and start going on TV more, but I think it would take a lot of nerve. If you think that he might still have it in his head, he's going to do it, and I am convinced he will not do it. But to do that soon, I think, is tough, even though there's an advantage to going first. I think that's why it's better. He takes the steam out of the impeachment if he announces sooner. It's like, what's the point? And his favorables go back up. And again, he doesn't have to step into what they're talking about in the primary debate. He should not touch prisoners voting and health care for illegals. He steps back and talks about no policy and just talks about stopping Russia from invading the rest of Europe, the threat to democracy, the January 6 findings, civic education, the rule of law, whatever, the bigger picture. And as a long-serving statesman, and that's how he serves them. And then the minute there's a nominee, he can jump back into that crap. But I think to sort of be the kind of Obama on high voice for a while is the best. It's the best thing for his poll numbers. It's the best thing for the party. And it allows, a free, open, healthy debate for the Democrats to sort of do all their sorting out of these issues as soon as possible. As long as he's in the picture, it's not a real conversation.
Okay, well, you should become White House Chief of Staff and arrange that all, because I wish I had more confidence that he knows he can't run, that they won't think he should run, because the nightmare of an open primary, you people like you and me like that idea, and I think we're right that a robust and healthy conversation will be ultimately good for the party. But that's not the way most operatives think. They just think, oh, my God, we're going to spend $500 million beating each other up. And we'll end up with we got saved in 2020 by Biden sort of at the last minute. But we could have a situation where you have that debate stage from 2019, late 2019, where they're just all sniping at each other. And none of them seems very strong at all. And Trump's sort of the likely nominee until we have to coalesce. But then who do we coalesce behind? And Pritzker thinks it should be him. And Newsom's the governor of the largest state. And Pete Buttigieg and Klobuchar got a lot of votes in 2020, and it could be pretty. There'll be a lot of. There's no obvious path, I guess. I mean, there are many paths. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. I don't know how much consensus they'll come to about how to conduct themselves as a party, as it were, even if there were a real party, which in a funny way there isn't these days. There's just a bunch of candidates.
I know. I mean, I guess you and I are idealizing the process because we think it could be constructive if they wanted it to be. But if they are a very, very divided party because they're the bigger coalition. They are a broader umbrella of interests. The Republican Party is really homogenous now. It's a Trumpy party with a few outliers who get censured by their state party and sent death threats on a daily basis. That's it. That's what the party is on the right. So on the left, you really have this unhappy marriage of all these different interests, and they're learning painful truths about the fact that they are losing Hispanics, and they never thought they would and took it for granted. They are losing black voters without college degrees, and that they, these are that the swing voter, the median voter in America, is a white person in their 50s who doesn't have a college degree. They swing elections, and they don't want to hear they're mad about Kenosha, and they don't want to hear your righteous crap. And so that's really hard I don't see the Democrats coming to terms with that. And I think you're right. I think it will be a fierce debate for the leadership in the House. And I think it will be, yes, probably a very tough, a tough primary contest. The one thing that I would argue, though, is that there are enough people like Biden, like Obama, Clinton, people that are still around who really should get in early and kind of press that it should be a governor, it should be a tactician, someone who's, been on the ground and done all this stuff and has solved problems and has a record to defend and ideas to propose. If they're smart, the sort of, the elders will see that there has to be an outside Washington appeal energy. And so if they were smart, they'd let Ayanna Pressley, fight with Julian Castro and Kamala Harris on the debate stage, but they would try to get in, at some point and form a juggernaut around, I would think, governors. But we don't even know if the smart guys on high are smart enough.
No, and can they even do a juggernaut these days? And, it's only
right.
3 different governors who are like multimillionaires who will just decide I'm the governor. So, I'm not going to step aside for the other one. And so the whole thing
Well, we did see a juggernaut. I mean, we literally saw Jim Clyburn convince like an entire party to stop Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders, literally, it was just like Donald Trump. He was the guy that could have won with a plurality.
Yep.
And just... and
that's a good point. So could you have a version? It came quite
close.
Yeah, but it came close. But yeah. Well, but that was last minute and somewhat flukish, right. and it was an interesting question. I mean, I think people underestimate, though, on both sides, how diverse the field is in the sense. I mean, I don't think AOC's out of the question as a candidate, and I think she could do pretty well in primaries. And on the other hand, I think Polis or some pretty moderate governor could do pretty well. I mean, it could be pretty, but there also could be 12 flavors in between, so to speak, and it could be pretty well. And maybe the elders can exercise some control, but maybe not. Right now, I think you and I would argue that it still will be healthy. I mean, that actually they're better off going through even a very raucous, primary, and if they end up with a decent nominee, because it will be better than a kind of trying to impose President Biden again, or impose Vice President Harris, or something like that. But that's where I wonder whether maybe you're right about. I mean, you could well be right about Biden. There'll be a certain amount of pressure to, as you said, that Tebby Troy piece. He's an intelligent guy. No, it has to be Biden again because that's the way income. There's a certain amount of let's pretend he's not 82, and let's pretend the Hunter Biden thing goes away, and let's just cross our fingers and try to make 2020 happen again in 2024. You think that's? I just think
it's not. I think it's not possible. He almost lost by fewer than 45,000 votes.
Yeah.
He was popular then. He was hiding in a basement then. He was actually. You can see in videotape. He was more vigorous then. He has aged. The presidency always ages you, and he is. There's too many things pulling him down. I mean, his polling among young people is abysmal. His polling among Democrats want someone else to run again, like 74% of them. Yeah. His son. It's going to be a huge. It's an impossibility. And the sooner that they reckon with it, the sooner. I mean, imagine him coming out today and saying, I'm running for reelection. I mean, he can't do it in an atmosphere like this where there's so much dissent, where Cori Bush and AOC are going to say, well, I really didn't want him to do that. You know, I mean, he's just so unpopular. I just think it's not the usual rules of just inertia and keep going and incumbency and everything. I just don't know that they apply. And I'm going to say something weird. I have been a fierce critic of Hillary Clinton. I mean, you just can't top me. National Review, Weekly Standard. Like I really hope. I think she understands the threat of Trump and Trumpism and the stolen, the plans to steal the election in 2024. This is really existential. I really hope that I hope she, like Obama, I hope they lean into this and they really tell the party, like, we have to win. We actually can't, have pie in the sky. We can't have what we want. We have to win. And, I hope that she is a voice of reason, because she's hinted at that, about how there's just kind of, how much the party lost its way last fall, fighting within the family over Build Back Better. And I don't know. I just think that there are enough people who really understand that, like, losing in 2024 it's really existential.
Yeah, I mentioned Bill Clinton could say that too, and it's an interesting question in today's politics, how much they could all say it, and then everyone would probably ignore them and go back to having a merry fight between God knows what issues, in the Democratic primary. So, but it would be interesting. Maybe they can
I mean, it's a coalition, right? Maybe they influence the donors.
I agree. One shouldn't. I don't mean to rule it out. It's an interesting moment of. We're testing a lot of things we haven't tested. But the truth is, in the Democratic Party, 2020 was so weird, the way it kind of Clyburn brought it together in South Carolina for Biden and everyone. And then Buttigieg and Klobuchar got out, and everyone and the others kind of collapsed on March 3rd. And Bloomberg turned out not to take off because he got so bruised by Warren in the debate out there in Nevada, which wasn't inevitable. I mean, there were a lot of things could have happened differently. I think everyone's concluded from 2020 that no problem. You have this primary, and then the guy wins who can actually win in November, which was Biden in this case, I think. But it didn't have to happen that way, and it could have been gone on for a long time. Maybe it would have been fine. Maybe Buttigieg ends up as the nominee and takes someone as VP, and they win in November too. But I just think people have overlearned in a way the 2020 lesson, and no one has therefore experienced for a long time in the Democratic Party a really open race with many candidates, some of them self-financed, others with their own bases of support, and the ideological fights you've been talking about. It could all be good. I mean, it could be healthy, sort of clearing the air, but it could be pretty crazy.
That's so interesting. You're right, because if we look back on the contests, there's always been a quasi-incumbent or a favorite. So Hillary was considered the favorite. It was her turn, she thought, in 08.
Right.
And then in 16, it had to be Hillary, because she didn't get it last time. And then Biden is the VP. He came in as the heavy, and so he was considered like the right thing to do in 2020. So it really is interesting. I mean, Harris does not start as the quasi-incumbent or the favorite.
Yeah, that's interesting too, and so, which is again a deviation from the norm. But say a word about, I guess, two more things. We should I'll let you go. Liz Cheney, very unusual position. It feels to me like she's in. Probably the most famous member of the House. I mean, the member of the House most central to our public debate in a long time. I can't really think of a House member who's been as important as Liz Cheney is. I mean, she may not have much of a practical political future in the next year or two or three, or next 2 weeks. We'll see what happens in Wyoming, but 3 weeks. But I don't know, except for a Speaker of the House, except for someone like Pelosi. I just think I think people haven't quite focused on how unusual a figure she is and how important maybe she could be or not, I guess, in 23, 24. So say a word about her. And then third parties, people always talk about that. You and I have been involved in many conversations about it. I don't know, if it's chaos, if Trump's going to be the Republican nominee and the left starts taking off on the Democratic side, is that conceivably, are we in a moment where the thing that never happens finally does happen with a credible centrist third party?
Well, as for Liz Cheney, I continue to be so moved by her guts and her moxie and her commitment to do the right thing. She's just been amazing. She is also just, for people who like us for people who haven't watched the hearings, I really implore you to take some time this summer to YouTube them, because it is absolutely worth your time. Or you can go to the January 6th committee website and not have any commentary and just see it from start to finish without interruption. But she is an extraordinary thinker and lawyer and writer and sort of strategist, and seeing that play out in the hearings has been really fun to watch. I mean, her statements are incredibly well written. I know a staffer did not write them. Liz Cheney is giving this her complete all, and it's her last stand. And she said the other day to Jake Tapper that she's more than willing to lose. This is the most important thing she's ever done in her professional life. It matters more than anything else. And she's just been. I've heard you say recently she's going to be one of the most famous House members to date ever, and I really think that's true. And I think I think she should be, and I think that it's really hard to just look around at anyone, not just in political life, Bill. I mean, in entertainment, in sports. I mean, who to look around and to grasp at a living hero. I mean, someone you can really look up to and who really inspires you is so rare. So I've been so moved by her and continue to be. And I hope, obviously, she stays a big voice. Sounds like she's going to run for president. I know what that means. Again, I don't know what that column, that pillar of righteous Dudley Do-Rights how they're going to survive in the Republican primary electorate.
Well, just on Cheney, I would just say, I mean, I was somewhat involved in 2019-20, and of course, Joe Walsh and Phil Wilder and Liz Cheney, and they got a combined 10-12% of the vote, I think, in New Hampshire, where they sort of made their effort. I could see, don't you think Liz Cheney gets maybe 15-20% of the vote, 25 conceivably, in a Republican field, and forces the other candidates to actually discuss certain things they don't want to discuss. I mean, she's on a stage with DeSantis and, Hawley and Pence and everyone else, and she says, okay, January 6th, what's your position on it, Ron? I mean, so I think she could have more of an effect than people now, the people who correctly, I think, say she's not going to be the Republican nominee in 2024 unless there's a, earthquake in American politics. People who correctly say that, too quickly, therefore say, but therefore she'll be irrelevant. There's an in-between position where you run as Gene McCarthy made a big difference in American history and American politics, though he was not the nominee in 1968, if you want an analogy.
I think you're right. She could dominate that side, which means Larry Hogan.
Yeah, she freezes the others out, I think. Yeah.
Right. So she freezes out the others. And you're right. If she's that one left and she's forcing everybody, including Trump. But as you said, he won't show up at the debates if he doesn't feel like it. So she's forcing these other people to come to Jesus. That in and of itself is, you're right, is very useful.
Or not. I mean, where they don't come.
But what if she's asked to be in a unity ticket? It affects the
dynamic.
What if she's asked to be in a unity ticket?
Okay, what about that?
So that's the whole thing. We know there are efforts underway to form third-party unity tickets. We don't know who the players are, but we know that there's a lot of money and interest and secret conversations and a lot of energy behind that now. So that would be interesting as well, as if someone convinced her to join a Democrat and form a unity ticket. So I don't know. I never say never. I mean, I really think that the rules no longer apply, and I will not. I fear the spoiler effect, as anybody else does, giving Trump a second term, which I really think will just melt America. And I can't even contemplate it. It's so hideous. But I think that I want to be open to the fact that the rules have changed enough, and the tectonic plates, have ground to dust in certain corners, and certainly this is a possibility now that this could happen if it was the right people, the right message. The message is very hard because they do have to find a place to land on policy, but I do think that it is possible. So it's like, is Liz Cheney an independent, or is she running as a Republican? So that's, to me, is still unknown.
Yeah, and so third parties may be a little less prohibitively unlikely than the past few cycles as
I think,
could emerge. Yeah. Well, as you say, the tectonic plates, I don't know what the right verb is, they're more tectonically moving, being tectonic here. Feels to me like for the next year or two, right? And it is hard to get one's head around, and of course by definition, therefore very hard to predict and to analyze. But thank you, AB, for spending this time today, because I think you've really helped me, and I think our viewers and listeners just begin to think through the situation, which is a much more complex one, I think, than the conventional, okay, we're into an election presidential cycle, let's look back at what happened in the last few, and this is the rules. But as you say, who knows what the rules are, right?
Right. We've learned that there are no rules, and that's why we're all so anxious.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, we'll get back together and anxiously discuss the situation maybe early in the next year, and you'll explain the meaning of the new Republican leader, new Democratic leader in the House, I guess maybe new Republican leader, and the candidates who are and aren't running, and whether Joe Biden is, if you're in the White House working with Joe Biden, to have him have a graceful and constructive and important last 2 years as a successful one-term president, I won't insist that you come on, but otherwise we'll do this again. And
well, I look forward to it, Bill. It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thanks, AB, for joining me, and thank you for joining us on Conversations.